What's up, marketing maniacs, and welcome back to another episode of From Startup to Wunderbrand, your ultimate BFF in the wide world of digital marketing. Join me, your host, Nicholas Kuhner, spilling the beans on the juiciest trends and hottest tips to up your marketing game. Hello, everyone, from a very warm and sunny Oslo. This is your host, Nicholas Kuhner, from Startup to Wunderbrand, and today we've got a very cool guy's got a much better beard than me, so I'm feeling a little bit less manly today, looking at that amazing beard you've got there, Abb-D. But we've got Abb-D Taiyo, who's the founder and co-director of Time, a digital agency and certified B Corp dedicated to creating impactful digital experiences that address complex social, environmental, and economic challenges. So you have got an interesting way in terms of how you started out your digital design business, which I'm sure you'll go into. But you're deeply committed to ESG goals. So you co-founded Time in 2016, and you are trying to focus exclusively on partners dedicated to sustainability, which I'm sure cuts down your target audience a little bit. Yeah, so Abb-D, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Nicholas. Yeah, great to be here.
So let's go a little bit into your background, because that's always, some people say, no, you talk too much about folks' backgrounds, but that's the interesting part to me. So why don't you talk to me about, number one, your background, and then how that got you into a digital agency focusing on ESG, sustainability, etc., and why people should care.
Okay, I'll try and wrap this up in a nutshell as best as I can, because we probably won't have enough time to kind of go deep into my backstory, but I guess it's a long story. I've had kind of multiple lives in some ways. When I was much younger, I grew up playing basketball and got to a point where I played semi-professionally within England, and went to the States, New York, on a scholarship. Things kind of fell apart, and in terms of my kind of career and what I learned, I studied fine art as kind of a base in terms of what I'm doing. Tried the whole basketball thing. It didn't quite work out. I came back and realized, okay, there's probably not much of a career in fine art. You know, there's very limited options here. So I took a very kind of proactive choice in transitioning that creative skill to something that felt a little bit more applicable, and design kind of just happened in that regard. And so, you know, my intention was to kind of study in the States, which never quite happened. So I kind of came in the UK, it's kind of A-level equivalent, essentially. Might be high school in the US, I'm not sure. But I got that far in terms of my education. And so at that point, I went down this path of self-teaching myself design. And over a number of years, at that point, I was kind of doing a little bit of music too. And then the way I kind of started to self-teach myself was basically doing album covers for my music friends and things like that as well. Fast forward a few years, I ended up getting to a point where I was kind of good enough where I could start charging people. And so that's kind of where my freelance path started kicking in. Fast forward a little bit more, I got better and better as I was kind of going through that process of blood, sweat, and tears. And got given a few opportunities working in kind of small local agencies, and then kind of did that for a number of years. And then again, fast forward a little bit more, one of the small agencies I worked for ended up getting acquired by a large agency, and then ended up being a senior kind of creative at a large kind of global marketing agency. And so for many people, dream job, it was kind of, working with really big brands. It was an international business, lots of really healthy budgets and massive teams and all that. But I got to a point eventually where I hit a saturation, and to me, the work wasn't good enough. It was kind of cookie cutter, and it wasn't really solving anything. And for me, it kind of hit me a little bit hard, because I had spent a lot of time and energy kind of getting to that point, kind of almost forcing my ways into the industry, and kind of asking myself the question at the end of it, I'm at the highest position, sort of kind of creative director level, and asking myself, is this it? Is this everything it has to offer? And so I kind of made a conscious decision alongside my wife, who kind of co-founded Time with me. She was working at a different company at the time, but she similarly hit a sort of same saturation point. We both just decided that, this is kind of not what we signed up for, and we think that design has a lot more responsibility in the world and can have a lot more accountability in terms of what it could be doing. So that's when we started our company, and kind of from the onset just kind of went in thinking, okay, well, let's think about purpose, let's think about working with people that are trying to do good in the world, and just kind of go at it with this idea that our work would at least kind of mean something, at least to us, at the very beginning. And so, yeah, and then again, fast forward another 8-9 years that Drift Time's been running. We've slowly been able to kind of formalize a little bit more what that looks like. So before, when we started, it was very ambient. It was just like, are they good? Is it good gut feeling? Then yes, we'll work for them. But now there's a lot more criteria, there's a lot more process involved, and there's a lot more understanding in terms of just how we think about impact, how we look at measuring impact, and how we kind of apply design in a way with a good degree of confidence in terms of what we do and the outcomes that can create.
So,
and here we are today.
So Drift Time, in terms of, it's a digital agency, but your focus is on working with companies who are wanting to improve their ESG outcomes, or are companies that are focused on sustainability. How do you sort of select or choose your clients?
Yeah, so yes, to a degree that there's a focus on sustainability and ESG, but those things aren't necessarily things that we hone in on. Those things are the results of things that we do. So the way we select our clients, we kind of tend to use a Venn diagram, which is purpose and intention. And the idea is that as a business or as a brand or whatever it might be, they have to have a core sense of purpose in terms of what they're doing. And then overlapping that, a core sense of intention, like what are they trying to solve? What is the complex issue that either them as a business, like on an everyday basis, try to work towards, or, a sort of standard that they're trying to improve or create a new benchmark, whatever that might be. But the purpose and intention needs to be very, very clear. And then for us to be able to work with them, there needs to be a clear sense of like what the digital element within that is, so we want to we want to be able to go into these kind of partnerships knowing that we can bring value and knowing that we can kind of help them towards this path towards impact, whatever that might look like for their business. And if it's not something related to digital, it makes no sense for us to be involved in it, so it's a very kind of clear sense of like, okay, well, how can we actually help them on that path? If we can't help them, there's no need for us to be involved.
So it's obviously just one aspect of the marketing mix. I know it's now traditional marketing. So new, when you and I started out, digital was this brand new separate entity, but now it's fully integrated into most businesses. In terms of the digital work that you do, how can digital have impact, and when clients come to you, what impact are they expecting from you? So what is your secret sauce that you give them versus just going to a VML or one of these other large agencies?
Yeah. Well, I guess so. In terms of what we do, so there's 3 overarching kind of services, if you will. It's the creative strategy element, it's the brand and storytelling, and then it's everything within digital. Not necessarily the marketing side of things, more so the design, the development, the technology, that kind of side of things. For things like marketing, we generally tend to partner with others, or if it's anything outside of our kind of wheelhouse, we have a very kind of collaborative approach in terms of bringing the right people in, specific to what they're trying to achieve, when it comes to impact. And so the way we look at it and the way we kind of position it is we always position ourselves as the fairy godmother to their Cinderella. We're not the protagonist in this story. We are here to kind of empower them and help them. So everything that we do is this idea of digital empowerment. How do we help them with what they have or what they need in order to get to that point? And it's not everything. It's not everything that's going to lead them to that impact. It's a small part in terms of everything else that they might need to do. So, and as I say, in some cases, if it's not related to digital, it makes no sense for us to be involved because, there's no need for us to be involved. And so the best way to kind of maybe explain that is to kind of give a couple examples of things that we've done in the past. So one of our kind of long-standing clients, only one, is an ocean conservation platform, and they work a lot in terms of kind of tackling the climate crisis through ocean conservation itself. Some of the key work that we've done, we've been working with them for 4 years now, but some of the key work we've done is a lot of the design aspects, but also the technology itself, designing the platform and designing it in a way that's kind of fully transparent, fully traceable, so that people can have I guess, an increased degree of accessibility, but also being able to take direct action towards something that is largely like, there's the whole thing of climate anxiety, right? Like largely a lot of people kind of just struggle with it, particularly when it comes to things like donating money or signing petitions, because you don't necessarily know what happens beyond that point. And so the key aspect to that platform, for example, is just this element of transparency, people being able to fully trace when they donate something, when they sign a petition, how that's progressing, what that's doing, whose hands it's going in, what they're using it for, and then ultimately, the kind of impact that that's creating on an individual level. Other examples could be perhaps more on the social impact space. There's a movement that we started working with recently, last year, called Art Not Evidence, and they're kind of focused on removing creative expression out of court, and specifically things like rap music. And there's an ongoing issue both in the US and in the UK where the justice system is using rap videos, for example, acts of creative expression, as evidence to put young Black men in prison and in jail, simply just by featuring in the video, and has nothing to do with whatever the alleged crime is or anything like that, but they're using that as collateral. So it's a campaign, it's a movement. We've done a lot of work with them in terms of the branding and their positioning, to kind of get them out there and kind of get this movement going. And so far, it's had really good press release, lots of really good prolific artists in the UK rap scene kind of support this and everything as well. So that's kind of the idea of digitally empowering someone so that they're in the best position to kind of create that traction.
A lot of these companies and campaigns that you're mentioning don't sound like they are big ticket items in terms of generating enormous amounts of budgets. Do you have to balance the feel good or the sort of, I'm not saying that you're doing a pro bono, but the sort of low budget, big impact work with actually having to pay the bills? How do you, and as a business that's focused on ability and making impact, how do you as a business owner balance those two needs?
So we do have a mixture. So it's a mixture of kind of the smaller ones that perhaps need that resource and need that kind of support, as well as the bigger ones that are looking to make those kind of more incremental shifts. So Early One is not huge. It's still a relatively new startup. However, they've got some big donors and big funders behind them. Other companies that we worked with Nespresso, the coffee brand, for example, specifically with their sustainability department, and helping them work on some of their kind of new sustainable offerings and things as well. Some of the recent stuff they've done is kind of transition all to compostable coffee pods, for example, which they're still rolling out in different countries, as well as other things from a digital perspective that we're kind of working on, which I can't say too much because of NDAs and things, but there are some stuff there that we're kind of working on. With the bigger companies, it's interestingly that small changes within those companies have actually huge ripple effects in terms of the impact that they can create, whereas the smaller companies generally don't have as much resource to create as much of a change or as much of a kind of move forward. And so you need a lot more kind of smaller businesses to kind of work on to kind of even just match the amount of impact that a bigger company could have just by making kind of small shifts. Another big company, for example, is Save the Children, which is more of an NGO, but still a bigger entity. And we help them, work with them, developing technology to go on the ground within Ukraine, for example, to kind of create a digital support network for people, who kind of need that support and need that kind of guidance and aid. Other things we're doing at the moment, working with Instant Aid, which is the team recently who work very closely with World Central Kitchen. They're the team that very recently got airstriked in Gaza, which is very, very sad. But we're working with them at the moment, again, to kind of put them in a really good positioning for significant funding, work with the UN and with the US government and so forth. But the idea is, in terms of how we balance that, is really just having that. It's having a balance. So the bigger companies, they have that resource, they have that budget, they have that scope in order to kind of create the change that they need. But then those things do also allow us to subsidize some of the smaller ones, particularly ones that kind of need that resource and need that accessibility for the things that we do. And so similarly, we're very selective in terms of who we work with. Even the smaller ones, we have to kind of really make sure that we can bring a tremendous amount of value to what it is that they're doing and really propel them forward. If we can't do that, it's likely something we wouldn't take on, even on a pro bono
Yeah.
pro bono space. But yeah, so that's the idea.
Interesting point you bring up there about the larger companies, even in incremental change, being able to make, in that business, being able to have larger ripple effect. I think that's the challenge companies have sometimes, is working with the likes of Coca-Cola and Nestle's and companies like this. Wow, these are the worst in the world. They're creating lots of pollution. They're ruining the water supplies, but they're actually making the most impact. And I remember Coca-Cola has obviously been dragged over the coals for water, sugar, things like that. But they're the ones who are, from a sustainability perspective, creating new wells in rural areas. They are making recycling. They are recycling bottles. They are doing a lot of things, obviously, maybe corrective things, fixing some things, mistakes they made in the past. But they've got the budget. They've got the ability to work with folks like yourself, for example, to do these bigger idea concepts, which can have bigger impact on society. So you have to work with the big boys in order to make a difference. So I'm glad you brought that point up. And there are a couple of parallels between Drift Time and my company Wunderbrand. I used to be a managing director of Interbrand in Africa. I had a lot of small companies who had sort of local African companies and companies from Southeast Asia who got in touch with us but couldn't afford the enormous fees that obviously the big US and UK brand agencies charged. And that made me quite sad, because those are the ones who needed the help. Those are the ones who needed some support. So that's why, similar to you, I got to the top of the tree and then realized, is this really what I want to be doing for the rest of my life? And started a business trying to focus on building emerging market brands. And that's what we've done. We've built brands, across the world, from, doing the first ever salt packaging in Botswana, as you know, retail salt packaging. And that country is literally built on a salt pan. So, and they were importing salt from South Africa. Just little things like that. And I think for when you're starting a business, and similar to Drift Time, it's very important having a very clear rationale for why you're starting this business, not just for making money, not just for, well, I've got to do something. It's, you've seen something in your current work which has really excited you, and you've just got to close your eyes, hold your nose, just jump into that water. Because I had no clients when I started out. So how did you take that leap? How difficult was it for you starting this business? Obviously you had the support of your co-founder, wonderful co-founder. But what was it like starting your own business, coming from probably a well-paid job to now everything on your back?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who was in that position or has been in that position knows there's a huge amount of risk involved in that. It's you're trying something new at that point, with no guarantee that it's going to work out, or that you even know what you're doing. So I think for us, so we, it was planning essentially. I think we were done in those roles long before we actually gave our notice in, and so that allowed us to start preparing for what the next stage may look like. And so it allowed us to kind of save a little bit, not a huge amount, but it allowed us to save a little bit in terms of our bank, just so we have a little bit of buffer for when, if something doesn't happen or it doesn't kind of play through, then we know we have X amount of months until our rent is due, basically, and we may need to get a job type thing. And so we did a bit of saving. We had a clear idea in terms of like, here's when we're going to hand our notice in, here's when the last day will be. And we basically worked very hard to kind of try and secure a couple clients at least, for when we hit the ground running. And that's essentially what we did. We had about 3,000 savings, which was like, okay, we'll have about 2 to 3 months of rent. At that time, this is again a long time ago, so rent was a bit cheaper then. And yeah, in the course of my notice, I think was about 6 weeks, just because of how senior I was. And so it gave us, again, a sort of a couple months or so to kind of just secure a couple projects. Now, they weren't the best projects. They weren't, 100% sort of purpose filled, but they felt like they had good intentions, and I think that's kind of a key aspect to starting something brand new as well. There's always going to be an element of compromise, I think. You can't go off the bat and saying, I'm going to be super strict and do this only, because it just doesn't always work out that way. There's an element of time, there's an element of credibility, there's an element of reputation that you need to build, which is kind of probably the most useful currency that anyone could have. And so, yeah, so we had a couple projects, pretty dry, pretty boring. One was like a law firm. The other was like some kind of business conferencing kind of thing, but it allowed us to kind of hit the ground running and think about how we can structure ourselves and kind of basically move forward.
Yeah. So everyone's startup journey is quite challenging. It's fascinating listening to the different ways that people go about it. Some people are just, fuck it, I can't do it anymore. Let me go and start something. And some are slightly more planned and organized like yourself. So let's have a look at, I do a lot with startups, and we work on brand strategy, and we work on developing your voice, and we look at, which target markets to focus on, which industries, etc. With your experience now in this space, what guidance would you give to any kind of young business starting up now? What kind of elements should they be integrating into their digital strategies that is going to give them sort of long-term benefits? And this is not about putting lipstick on a pig or a plaster over something that's not working. From your experience, what do you think new startups need to bake into their DNA now to be successful?
It's a good question. I would probably say just having a clear sense of focus in terms of what their mission is and what they're trying to do. I think with a lot of startups, or particularly young companies, they are hyper ambitious a lot of the time. They want to solve the world. They want to fix everything, right? And so it's very easy to kind of, in some ways, say yes to everything and try to do everything. Whereas if you kind of just really figure out what the focus is and what the core intention is, like what are they trying to solve? And that's kind of really all they need to do. And as if it's structured around a business, it needs to do that one thing really, really well for it to be competitive in that landscape, But one thing we've been talking about a lot recently, something that we've been thinking about and sort of talking about recently, is this idea of the sphere of action, which we're calling, which are kind of three things to kind of help kind of define what that focus is. The first thing is control, like understanding what them as a business have direct control over. So that can be anything that's internal in terms of, in the digital landscape, for example, we are only going to use renewable hosting. We're going to build websites or apps or anything that's digital in very lightweight, kind of CO2 friendly infrastructures and ecosystems. These are things that are very clearly controllable within the company. So defining what the things that the company can control. Second is influence. So understanding what they can influence. It's not necessarily, it's kind of par control, but then also kind of a little bit beyond that. And it could be, for example, that if they have a good platform, it could be a social media following, it could be podcasts, for example, something like that. But the idea would be, how do we influence the right kind of thinking or the right kinds of processes towards this idea of impact or sustainability? And so knowing what they can control, knowing what they can influence using their platforms and their channels. And then the last one is knowing what they can advocate for, which is largely things outside of their control, but it's perhaps peers or people within their industry doing really great work, kind of achieving new benchmarks and sort of going down a path that's kind of aspirational to them. And that for them is kind of just celebrating that. It's talking about that, it's advocating for that. And so by having those three things, it kind of naturally creates a very clear focus in terms of like, this is how we talk about stuff, this is how we communicate, and this is kind of what our mission is, what our focus is, and what we're trying to do.
So I see you practice what you preach as well. So you're a B Corp. Maybe to some people who don't know what that is, maybe just talk through what that is, what the process is of actually getting that certification, and why that process is important. I think new businesses should focus on getting that from the start, or at least aim at getting a B Corp status.
Yeah. Well, I guess for those that don't know, B Corp or Benefit Corporation, which is kind of the longer handle, if you will, is, I would say, an incredibly difficult accreditation to get for your business. It's one that I highly recommend. It's one that is changing as well, I might add, who anyone that might not be aware, but they are kind of changing the scoring system and the way the assessments work. But essentially, it's a very good mirror to hold up against yourself and your business. And there's a requirement of 80 points out of 200 in order to get that accreditation. It sounds, it's less than half. It sounds like it's quite easy, but it's actually incredibly difficult. And a lot of companies don't actually get the accreditation just based on how traditionally businesses have worked or how they've been structured. And so it kind of requires a lot in terms of how you restructure things, how you think about things, adopting sort of thinking like triple bottom line structures, for example, in terms of how you include people and the planet as stakeholders, not just kind of profit. And yeah, and I would say, regardless of kind of going into it, B Corp in itself is just a step. I wouldn't say it's the end goal. Like getting the accreditation doesn't mean that you're done. There's still a lot of work to be done beyond that point. But it's, regardless of getting the points or not, it's an amazing blueprint to help you think about things that you may not have thought about otherwise. And that's exactly what it was for us. Like we had been running for a number of years, very outwardly kind of purpose driven and kind of thinking about trying to make design more responsible, more accountable. And as we went through the B Corp process, we're currently going through a recertification at the moment, but as we first did it, it kind of allowed us to think about things that just, normally we wouldn't have thought about at all. And so a couple of things that really helped us do, it helped us kind of understand where we were doing well and the things that we should celebrate, things that we were sort of doing but didn't really have formal structure around, and then things that we are lacking and missing because we had no idea these things were things that we should be thinking about. And so it's a really good blueprint. And I think for anyone to kind of go in at the offset and just say, like, just go through it, see what it is, and kind of just take notes. And that will kind of help, I guess, inform you in terms of how to structure the business or how you'd like to structure the business for it to be something that's more long-term as opposed to short-term.
Yeah, I love that. I just hated the brand name though. It should be A Corp, not B Corp. I always like, why B? So, yeah, some exciting stuff. I think this is obviously going to be a growth area, and it sounds like design is one aspect of the business, but as I'm sure you found now, design is being commoditized to a great degree. And obviously we still need great design, we still need great thinkers, but it seems like the technology side, actually dissemination in the correct way of all of this creative is sort of a direction that you're moving into. So do you foresee yourself in the next sort of 5 years being more technology house than a design house?
Not so much actually. So probably more of a strategic house, I would say. I think the technology, so although we kind of bolster this idea of simplified technology and using things like headless architectures and so forth, these things are still very largely accessible and most development companies can work in the same framework. And so for us, it's more about the strategic approach, I would say. Like a lot of what we're doing, what we have been doing for the last 8 to 9 years is proving that we know how to kind of measure impact and how we can kind of achieve impact through this idea of design. And so we don't want that to be exclusive to us and someone working with us and going through the process of working with us. And so what we're doing at the moment is really thinking about how we make this more widely available for others. And so a couple of things that we're doing, I'm in the process of writing a book, which hopefully is going to be published next year. But we're also in the process of putting our frameworks and the way that we think about impact in a more formal sense, where people can kind of get these processes and ways of doing and apply them themselves. And we're sort of kind of formulating that at the moment. We're trying some things out and testing it, stress testing it really, just to see how it can break. But yeah, the idea is that we kind of go down more this strategic route and help people kind of better understand this idea of impact and how to achieve it through design.
It's so exciting. It's amazing how your business just has to continually keep evolving. It's never sort of you making widgets and that's what you're going to be doing for the next year. I mean, it would be much easier if it was, here's the cookie cutter, let's go. But I suppose that's what keeps us in business and keeps us excited. I love your website. I think everyone should go and have a look at it. It's drifttime.media, I believe. So I'll put that link in the description. And the design of that is beautiful, and it also takes folks through some of your case studies, some of the great work that you're doing, and just looks pretty as well. So I just want to say 10 points. I quite like that. So
thank you. So we're actually changing it at the moment. So
Well, I'll just
hopefully,
give it to me. I'll take that. You can have your new one. So if that's the old one. I'm really looking forward to seeing the new one. I am looking forward to hearing about your book, and we'll have you back on here when you've got that, and we can talk about how folks can make an impact both in their business and in society as a whole. Abb-D, great chatting to you, and I think people should really take this. The thought of impact measurement seriously as well, and talk to companies who can help you get there.
great. Thanks for having me, Nicholas. And it's been an absolute pleasure being on the show.
Awesome. Have a fantastic weekend.
And you.
Now, before we wrap up, don't forget to show some love for From Startup to Wunderbrand by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. If you'd like to help us grow, tell your friends, share on social media, and leave us a review. For those of you who want to dive a little bit deeper into the topic, join me on Twitter @NickKuna. Let's connect and chat about all things branding and digital. Until next time.